morning. We are back, huh? That's right. We're back for week 4. Jeez. So much good stuff going on at the moment, huh? I know. Is everyone having a ball? Yep. Amelia's pumping iron. Ryan Taylor, yeah. Could you hear me? Could you just saying, could you hear me? Or were you pumped? Oh, geez, tough crowd today. Got nothing out there. Can anyone hear me? So you can all hear me, you're just not pumped. Okay, I'm going to say that again, and I'm going to want a little bit more of a response. Who's pumped for this? To talk about joints and articulations? There we go. There we go. Fantastico. That's it. Come on, guys. I'm trying to light a fire under you. Okay, like this is the big thing. Okay, this is really, really good stuff that we're getting into today. Okay, so let's get exactly right, John. Let's get cracking. Let's get into it. Okay, that's it. Yep, fantastic. This is more. This is the energy I need from you guys. Right. This is a hard life. All right. Okay. So we've got a lot of slides to get through, but I'm not going to get through. I didn't trim them back. What I'll do is I'll just skip past the ones which we don't need, because the reason why I don't want to get rid of any slides is as I'm skipping past things that I don't think you need extra time on. You can stop me if you like, and you can ask questions about that stuff. Okay. All right. So again, as always, what we're going to do is we're going to go through the main key points, and this isn't look with the quizzes, you might be asked anything that's on these slides, right? Those quizzes are worth 3%, and they're not hard. They're not hard questions, right? What I'm talking about though is with the exam. Your end of semester exam is a big thing, right? And it's going to be very hard because it's not going to have it's not open book or anything. So when I'm saying what you do need to know in depth, I'm talking more about the exam in terms of the big questions. So the layout of the exam is there's going to be a whole bunch of multiple choice questions, and then there's going to be big questions, right? So when I say about what you should know quite in depth, I'm talking more about the big questions, ones that are going to be worth 10 marks or something like that, where you might have to, write a couple of paragraphs about something, okay? So that's what I'm talking about with there. Doesn't mean that you can ignore everything else, unless I specifically say you don't need to know everything on this slide, but you should know this. Then that's obviously that's something you should pay attention to. So with the labs, tomorrow is the last day for lab 1. Now, unfortunately, I know that a few of you have had special consideration, and I've tried my best to get you guys into classes. If I haven't responded to your special consideration request yet, then please send me a reminder email. As I mentioned, 600 students. We tend to get a lot of emails every day, and chasing up on these things is very, very hard, and it's definitely a lot more than the time I'm allocated for in my job. Because I am teaching into other things. I've got research or PhD students, everything like that, which makes my job a little bit tough. It's only around this time of the semester, okay? But I'm happy to help wherever I can. The one thing that I can say is that there are a few of you who had got lost on the way to your lab, or the dog ate your homework, ate your timetable, you missed your bus or something like that. You didn't have special consideration. I tried my best to help you guys out, but the problem is there's nothing on the actual. So there's nothing, no spots left for physiology tomorrow. There's a couple of spots left for anatomy, but no spots left for physiology. Hmm? No. It's due the week after. So you get that means that all of them are due 1 week after the block ends. Okay, does that make sense to everyone? Okay, so we do Amelia, we do lab 1 between week 1 and 4. So no, it's not due tomorrow. It's due next week on the 4th. Yes, yeah, that's right. So basically, it's not a hard report. They're not like lab reports where you're typing up a report or anything. So they're not too challenging. So I know it's not ideal for the group that actually is that did it in week 1 compared to the group that did it in week 4, but we need to give that week of write-up time for the people who did it who are doing it tomorrow. So everyone, it's due at the end of week 5, okay? And that means that lab 2, have you pumped your iron today? Oh, I've been trying to, Shay, but there's just been way too much going on, too much good stuff. So, and lab 2 for both anatomy and physiology will be due at the end of week 9. Okay, so do we need to study the information in the labs for our final exam? No, Michaela, you don't need to study that, but that's all connected to this anyway. All right, no more questions about this stuff. Let's get on to content. Otherwise, it's just going to be a Q&A about everything other than the awesome anatomy that we're doing. Okay, so let's get into the joints, huh? Let's get into the joints. These are the learning outcomes, but I'm going to show you the things that I really want you to focus on. Okay, so turning the chat group off now. Put your hand up if you've got questions. All right, so in terms of understanding what your the joint types are, you should know what these means. It's not very hard, right? Synarthrosis is no movement at all, so they're fused joints. Your skull's a really good example of that as well. Ampiarthrosis is little movement, so your tib-fib joint, there's very little movement there. It is a hinge joint, but it's got very little movement, right? It's kind of stuck together because those, like, even though we're not talking about at the joint, we're talking about the join between the tibia and fibula, which I'll put this cursor on, which you can see over there. That's a good example of that. There's little movement. You can actually move your tib-fib around a little bit if you like. And diarthrosis is something like your knee or your hip, where there's free movement. You can do a whole bunch of things. This stuff, just know the basics of it. You're not going to be asked to write everything about these slides, but it is pretty straightforward, right? Just understand what types of movement you can do, and really you should be able to understand the particular axes of motion that each joint have and what they're restricted to. So again, you've got angular motion, circumduction, rotation, all those sorts of ways we describe the way joints move. You should know the basics of this mostly for the quiz. There's going to be questions in the quiz if you haven't done it already, which is about the definitions of some of these joint types. So a gliding joint is something that can sort of move, forward, backwards, left and right. A hinge joint, such as your elbow or your knee or your ankle, is very obvious. It's a hinge, sort of moves like a door, right? A condylar joint and the saddle joint are what people tend to get mixed up on a fair bit. They basically are very similar things in regards to the types of movement they have. What it is it's the particular way that they sit within the joint here as well. So if you think about your metacarpal, which is the base of your thumb, that's a saddle joint because it straddles the trapezium. Whereas what you might find if you want to look at some of those joints in the more bonier parts of your wrist and the bonier parts of your ankle, they tend to have a bit of a sandwiched condylar joint. And what it is it's almost like when you've got they're forced in by pressure almost, which kind of keeps them there, but they're just sitting almost like they're sitting in a cup, almost like when you stack cups on top of one another. Okay, so your pivot joints, as they think about the way that your spine moves as well. It just moves left to right. Really, you're not gonna you don't have much movement going up and down or anything like that with those sorts of joints. Ball and sockets are going to be your hip and your shoulder. All right. So in terms of your knee, so you should be able to recognize your tib and your fib. You should be able to recognize these things anyway, the main things, right? We're not going to talk about the membrane, but you should be able to identify that, oh yeah, that's a fat pad just by the look of it, especially after we end up covering a little bit more in regards to sort of anatomical structure and stuff like that. You should over time be quite confident knowing that cartoon representation of fat, knows that that's a fat pad. And the fat pad actually gives it some stability as well. You got ligaments, tendons, and you've got your bursa as well. They all provide, and you know your synovial membrane encapsulates the area where your tib and your fib meet. And basically, what that does is it has synovial fluid in it as well. And those of you, has anyone here ever done a bad injury to their knee where they might have ruptured their synovial membrane and then their knee fills up full of fluid? Anyone done that before? I've done it, and it's not ideal. Yeah, you've done it, Michaela. Yeah, it's not ideal. So my knee before I had surgery on it used to just fill up with fluid a lot, and I used to have to go and get it drained as well, where they'd suck out about 20 mils of synovial fluid. It definitely was not an ideal scenario to be in, but it was like it was kind of interesting because I was telling the guy that I teach anatomy and physiology, and my knee is full of synovial fluid now, and yeah, the doctor just looked up at me and just said, "Shut up." Okay, so movements at the synovial joints. So again, we've covered these already, but the one thing that I do want you to try and remember is just for short answer questions that you might be asked is in terms of planes of movement. If you've got one plane, two planes, or three planes, there's good examples here as well. Think about it. Your elbow really only goes up and down, doesn't it? You can rotate it, but it does. Its main function is up and down. Your wrist has two planes: up, down, left, right. You can do that quite easy. You can do it with me now. Triaxial is your shoulder, and good example over here. You can see the particular bi-directional ways in which they can move in three different ways. Three different ways meaning you can go superior, inferior, lateral, medial, or anterior, posterior. How many people actually did that with their wrist and stuff? You're moving that around. That's a really good way to learn this sort of stuff is by actually doing the actual motions yourself. Yeah, good stuff, Sophia. This is good. So next time you're in the gym and you're pumping some iron, you can actually just go up to people when they're pumping their guns. If they're doing that one for, I think there's one where you can do it for your forearms, and you might actually want to walk up to one of those people where they're doing that thing where they move their wrist back and forth. You can go up and say, "Do you know you're doing flexion and extension of your wrist there?" And the person's probably going to look at you and say, "Shut up." Okay, but anyway, here we go. So we've got flexion, extension, and anything that goes the opposite motion further than extension is hyperextension. This stuff you probably already know just in lay terms anyway. We've already covered abduction and adduction and circumduction in the earlier planes of reference that we were talking about in week 2. Movement names, again, we've got you've got lateral and external, medial and internal, supination and pronation. Supination and pronation is something that usually catch people up if we ever put it as a small true or false or multiple choice question on the exam. Just remember, just remember that you're going to have to come up with some way to remember that having your hand out, expecting someone to slap you a high five down low is you're supinating. You're in supination there, and you're in pronation if you're the one given the high five. Soup bowl, that's a good one. That's actually a really good one, John. Soup bowl, you got your hand out like a soup bowl. Fantastic. Okay, your special movements here, you're not going to be asked a lot about this sort of stuff. But again, could be small answer questions, but I'm not going to get you to ask. I'm not going to tell you to write a large, one of the larger answers or larger questions are not going to be saying, name all the different ways that our joints work or anything like that. Okay, you got to know the basics of these joints, but I want you to know the basics of these in terms of articulations. You do not need to remember the names of these ligaments. You should be able to recognize the bones. You should be able to know about the articulations of it, but you definitely do not need to know the ligaments of your knee and your elbow. I think I repeated that about 10 times in the lecture because I don't want you guys going off and being able to remember these. Look, there are 7 supporting ligaments that you have of the knee. Going off and actually trying to remember the names of all of them. I had to back when I was your age, but that was the bad old days, right? So I had to remember all of these, and it was an absolute nightmare to remember. Understand their function and how they're stabilized, but in terms of the names of it, I think in this particular version of anatomy and physiology that we're teaching you in your health science degree, there's a lot of information already. So I'm not going to expect you to be able to describe all of the actual ligaments. There's quite a few though as well, and there's a fair few here that you might. Has anyone here actually torn one of any of the ligaments on their knee joint before? Yeah, you guys have. Yeah, it's not ideal, is it? And one of the things that you might find with that is that immediately you notice there's destabilization of your knee. The knee has a lot of movement, but it comes at a consequence as well, and that's because it's stabilized in that particular fixed. Oh, you did an ACL. Okay, well that's not good, Malika. But one thing that you do find with a lot of joints that have a lot more free movement, especially if they're very weight bearing, such as your knee, it means that they're going to be stabilized by a lot of ligaments. And unfortunately, they just don't hold up to wear and tear all that well. And when they do go, they go. Problem with ligaments is they don't have a massive blood supply there as well to be able to sort of be able to allow that repair process to occur like it does with muscle as well. And that mostly is due to their makeup as well. Okay, shoulder and hip. That's their ball and socket joints is basically exactly the same in terms of their movement. However, obviously one's weight bearing and the other one is only weight bearing when you're at the go and pump and iron, right? Your shoulder doesn't take the stress that your hips do. However, they are stabilized in a very similar fashion. Again, know the bones here. You should be able to know that there's the clavicle. So I'm just getting emails popping through about labs tomorrow. So many of you are pumped about this, right? So you should be able to just understand like be able to identify what these things are, but not by name. So you should be able to know that you've got your joint cavity there, that you've got a capsule, and that you're going to and that you've got cartilage, and that you've got your ligaments there as well. But I'm not going to expect you to be able to name all of the actual ligaments of the shoulder, nor will I the hip as well. Again, what I would expect you to know though is the articulations that these joints can have. Okay. And your hip and your shoulder are really good examples of ones that can do 3 particular movements as well, right? Now, when these things start to degenerate, then it's all downhill. Usually, rheumatism, arthritis, and osteoarthritis. Okay, we'll move on from there. If anyone wants me to stop, just let me know. Otherwise, again, you guys know the difference between your osteoblasts and your osteoclasts. Okay. Should be able to now start to understand the integration that these have with other systems too. So I'm just going through these quick because I definitely want us to move on to the better stuff. What causes clicking sounds in your hip flexors? Okay, really. That can be a number of things, right? So what it can be, there's really interesting stuff. I know this because I've got clicking in my left hip, and I have had for a while, which is sign largely from sports in my older age. But what it can be is it can be inflammation to the ligament. It can be a tear to the ligament as well. It can be a tear to the cartilage that you have around your hip as well. And it can also be, with people probably around my age, it can be bony growths that you end up having on around here as well, which actually causes almost the ligaments to roll over them as well. So usually it is a ligament click that you're feeling. It's not like bone on bone because that's incredibly painful. Usually it's a ligament clicking over. So it can be that they're inflamed. It can be that one's torn a little bit as well, and you don't know it, and it's just got a little bit of scar tissue on there as well. Does that answer your question? It's a good question. Yep. Hip clicking. Hip clicking fun, right? Ah, you're welcome. All right. So try to now understand at the end of each one of these lectures, whenever it's available in the actual textbook, I added into this as well. Hip click and fun. Yeah. So what I do is I want you to try and think about how these things integrate as well. Because at the end of it, what we really want is we want you to understand how a fully functional human works. All right, here we go. Guns, big guns. Okay, we're talking about guns today. When I talk about guns, I'm talking about muscles, right? I'm not a huge gym guy, but tell you what, talking about guns in this particular part of the lecture, people get so hyped up on this, especially the people who are doing, the sports science degree. Anyone here doing the sports science degree or anything? Ooh, we've got no people here doing the sports science degree. Usually they're the ones who are pumped up about the guns, or they're here and they're just not actually saying anything because they're astonished, right? It could be that as well. Anyone here go to the GYM this morning? Nothing. No one go to the gym? Yep, Brian did. Yeah, Amelia's having a rest day. Yeah, going after this. Okay, that's good. So this should get you that pump that you need to be able to get into the game and get your stuff done as well. Now, the things that you're going to have to remember here in terms of knowing actually how they work are the events at the neuromuscular junction. You've got to know the basics of the things that differentiate the different muscle types, which we talked about this in terms of skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, and smooth muscle. So we talked about this already in week 2 when we're talking about things at the tissue level. You've got to know how they. You've got to know the main characteristics of all 3 of these. And that might be. I'm not saying it will be, but it might be a question on the exam. Okay, the things that people get stuck on with anatomy when they're learning it is they don't realize that a lot of these things, especially when we're talking about fibrous sort of tissue, is that it's kind of almost like trying to think of a good analogy here, but it's almost like you have these complex fibers come together and then we just repeat them almost, and then it's just like Lego blocks that are all the same, if that makes sense. So by this, we've got your epimysium, your perimysium, and your endomysium, right? I just want to get to this particular image. Okay, this is what we're talking about here. Okay, so like if we want to zoom in closer and closer and closer, a muscle fiber, so pretty much a cell here, if we take one of these, what'll end up happening is you can see here you've got your where a lot of those particular things that you need to know about where they're present, right? So here's your endomysium here. Now, if we get a bundle of those cells together, that's a bundle of fibers, right? The muscle fiber is basically, this is one cell of it. If we get a bundle of those fibers together and we lay them, almost like imagine if you're running multiple cords together for like in electrical sort of circuits or so. On the outside, your perimysium. On the inside, in between, the space in between the actual muscle fibers is your endomysium, right? So your perimysium, your endomysium, and then your epimysium, if we go further over, is the actual sheath that surrounds the whole area there as well. So again, we go from a small version, so one strand of fiber, a bundle of those fibers coming together creates a muscle fascicle, and then a collection of those fascicles together is what actually creates the skeletal muscle itself. So you do need to know that. And you should want to know that. That's just awesome stuff, right? You've got to know the differences between skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, and smooth muscle. The best way to do that is understand, if you go back into week 2, we covered a lot of this in terms of which of these muscles are striated, which of these muscles are multinuclei, which of these muscles can function aerobically or anaerobically. Your skeletal muscle obviously has a lot of striations. You can actually see them there. They're those lines that we're talking about as well. We're also you also should be able to identify the nuclei there, and you can see that these are multinucleated. And you should know the respiration of this muscle type as well, which is aerobic and anaerobic. Now, your skeletal muscle fiber is a really good example of understanding how contractions can occur, right? Contractions occur because of myofilaments. So in this case here, you got actin and myosin. You don't need to know a lot about actin or myosin, but what you do need to know is that a myofilament is a bunch of sarcomeres, right? So, and those interactions are what actually creates contraction. And so every time you're at the gym and you're pumping your guns, this is what's happening. We end up having this ratchet-like function that makes these particular bands compress and come together. So remember the bands here as well. So the overlap between your actin and between your myosin, which is your thick filament, and the actin, which is the thin filament, is basically what we describe around here at the A band. Remember, the M line is the center of the A band. The H band has only thick filaments, and the zone of overlap has both thick and thin filaments though as well. The I band only has thin filaments. How are muscle knots formed? Usually that comes from muscle knots, usually comes from different fibers and stuff like that. And what it can be is that you can have inflammation in those particular areas. So your muscle knots are typically areas where you might have, you can get cross-linking of fibers as well that can contribute to knots too. It's a bit of a multi-layered question there, but one interesting thing, I'll get to it a bit later, but as we age, we tend to get more cross-linking between these fibers, and that's what causes a lack of flexibility as we get older. Okay, let's get back to this though. The Z line marks the boundaries between these adjacent sarcomeres, and basically what we get when we actually have flexion occurring, we get this ratcheting-like function of the myosin head. And what that does is it brings the two of these together. So we'll just go on about this. So your H bands will narrow, the zones of overlap are going to widen, and the Z lines move closer together. But the width of the A band remains constant. So if you look here, here's your A band here. What ends up happening is you get this during contraction, the A bands are basically stay the same width, but the Z lines, which you can see here, these are the things that move. They're sort of moving in. So it's kind of like they're shifting in this ratchet-like function as they're being sort of corkscrewed into causing that particular contraction. Put your fingers together, like you're doing the house and the steeple sort of thing. I'm not sure if you're young enough to know, if you're old enough to know that. If you put your fingers together and then sort of clamp them together, it's sort of like that sort of motion during contraction. So everything else kind of pulls in, so rather than being pushed in, if that makes sense. A couple of things a good one to remember, the way to remember this is muscles pull, they don't push. So they're not getting pushed. It's a ratchet-like function that allows contraction to occur, and that's the active process of it, which causes the whole muscle shortening thing. You've got to know the basics about the way that our neuromuscular junction functions. This is the slide that you've got to know. There's a really good description of this in your textbook, so you definitely do need to know this. It's really not that hard. This you don't need to know. I put this in here for those who are more interested in everything about the whole contraction and coupling process. You don't need to know this for the exam, okay? Just really wanted to put that in there for those of you who are interested a little bit more in that. You do need to know this level of information for cardiac tissue. Again, in the past we've had a long question on the exam that says outline the functions and structures of the three major muscle types and define, what differentiates them from one another. So again, you should be able to know the basics of your cardiac muscle. Again, know that it's aerobic. It only functions on aerobic metabolism. Our heart cannot function anaerobically, and that's why heart attacks occur. Okay, you're going to end up knowing a lot more about pacemaker cells and things like that when we talk about the cardiovascular system and when we cover the conductivity of the heart. That will be later on in the semester. Smooth muscle tissue is largely, it's not, it has very little nervous stimulation. It typically is regulated by hormonal control. You've also got to know the differences in the way these contract. Remember, there's no sarcomeres here, so there's no striations, which means there's none of that ratcheting that you actually find between the actin and myosin filaments. And you got to remember that your smooth muscle tissue is always just sort of in the background doing its thing, right? Think about, you don't tell your intestines to digest, right? Your skeletal muscle function is voluntary unless there's a stimulus, like you touch something hot, and your nervous system tells your arm pull back. But you decide that you're going to walk. You decide if you're going to actually have a cup of coffee and move your hands to grab something. You do not tell your digestive system, all right, now digest this. You don't do that. And that's because it's related on hormonal control. So remember, it's a negative feedback loop and it's slowly working in the background just to make sure that things are constantly moving. Okay, skip past here. Let's get into muscle systems. I know some of you are pumped on muscles, but a few of you, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, how do these work as systems? Okay, who here is absolutely pumped? Like you just can't. You're astonished. If someone walked in and and said and they were robbing you or something like that, and they had a gun at your head, who would just be completely unresponsible? I mean, unresponsive. Who would be completely unresponsive just because of the amount of information you're getting right now that's just completely blowing your minds. We got a bit of that? Wow. Oh yeah, here we go. It's coming through. Oh, Daniel, what are we going to do to get this? What are we going to do, Daniel, to get that pump from being a little bit, just a little, to being a lot? I know what you're saying. You're saying you want to know about muscle systems. Well, don't worry. We've got you. We've got you. We've got you here. Okay. It'll increase over time, and it certainly will with this lecture, Daniel. So, all right, fantastico. Okay, so the muscular system is only of skeletal muscles. Again, that could be a true or false question on the exam, so don't be a sucker, okay? The muscular system, when we talk about that, we're talking about skeletal muscles. We're not talking about your smooth muscles or your heart. So, your muscle fibers, as you know from the last lecture, are going to end up forming fascicles, and basically the patterns of fascicle arrangement will give you the certain types of muscles that you actually get. These are really straightforward when you actually, I know that some of the naming is a little bit silly here in regards to being able to remember them logically, but the parallel and circular should be quite easy. Convergent and pennant obviously need a little bit more information here, but you should know the way that these muscles form because of or the way that they actually have that phenotypical look is because of the pattern of fascicle arrangement. And you can see it actually running in each one of these muscles, whether or not they're parallel or if they're convergent. So I'm going to get past here. So you've got to know these, right? Okay. Going to move on a little bit because I want to get up to joints. This is the good part. So unfortunately, you are going to have to remember those as well. This is an interesting one. A lot of people think when you've closed your mouth, when someone says, be quiet and relax and close your mouth, or shut up, in other words, that actually means that you're contracting your sphincter. So you basically your circular muscles, such as your mouth, um, when they're actually contracted when they're shut. So if you're just sitting there and you got your mouth wide open, that means you're super relaxed on your mouth. Okay. Almost all skeletal muscles attach to bones. That's a really good one for you to be able to remember. Each bone is going to act as a lever. So let's talk about levers, okay? Now, when we talk about levers, we're talking about three classes of levers: first class levers, second class levers, and third class levers. There's really good examples of these. You do need to know these for the quiz in particular. There's a few questions on there. Keep in mind the quizzes that we've done, they come from a question bank that I put together each week of around 100 questions or something like that. So you're not going to get the same questions as your friends. So you might have got some of these, you may not have got some of these, depending on the roulette that you actually got in regards to your questions. So we ask X amount ones from each lecture. But first class levers, this is actually is where it gets fun, right? It does become quite fun when you're actually talking about the way joints work. By the way, I did refer to I tend to I don't use a lot of conventional insults for my friends or enemies, right? What I do is I tend to use anatomical terms and scientific terms that people don't really know. So I referred to someone the other day as a first class lever, and they took offense to it, which was a little bit odd. Might have been the way I said it. I said, "Oh, you're a first class lever, aren't you?" They got offended. Okay. First class levers, if you think about it, it's basically is like when you're prying a bar and you've got here's your fulcrum, there's your load, and there's the applied force. These things are really easy once you get a hang of it, and you can start applying it to all different sorts of joints, right? Remember, the fulcrum is the joint that's going to actually move, right? So the fulcrum is always going to be the joint. That's where you're going to have the movement. The load is the thing that needs to be lifted, and the applied force is the muscle. How are we feeling on that? Does everyone get that? Because once you get that into your head that the fulcrum is the joint and the applied force is the muscle, then it makes sense what the load is, right? So here, second class lever, we got here. So again, the joint here is this particular motion here. This is where you're going to stand on your toes. That's the joint that's going to move. The load that you need to lift is your heel, and then your gastrocnemius is the applied force, because that's the muscle that's contracting to do all the work. Pretty cool, huh? Second class lever. Think about a wheelbarrow. So if you're thinking about the way that if you're in the exam and you're asked about levers, right? And one of the questions is Greg a first class, second class, or third class lever, and describe each one of those? Then you would have to say, well, he's not a lever. Greg isn't a lever. However, first class lever. I'd take first class lever for sure. Thank you. But first class lever, second class lever, and third class lever, you can remember them as either being a pry bar, a wheelbarrow, or or some tongs. Here you are. You're grilling some tofu on the barbecue, right? Because everyone grills tofu on the barbecue. So here you've got your load. The load is that big, juicy, fake chicken made out of tofu that you've got on there. The applied force is when you're squeezing the tongs. Tofu gang, indeed, Amelia. And the force is obviously the fulcrum is in terms of your joint is going to be replicated in terms of that's by the end of your tongs, right? I find this tongs thing a little bit harder to remember, so I actually just remember the biceps. Pump an iron at the gym when you're trying to get your guns going. By the way, your biceps are your guns, right? So those of you who are aiming to get big guns, remember the joint that moves that is the elbow. Your guns are over here. That's the applied force that's going to do that motion. and the load is whatever, however many kilos you put into that hand to increase your gun size. So does that make sense to everyone? I'm hoping so. I'm hoping it makes sense. Any questions about that? Any questions about this stuff? And by the way, this is really interesting. Is anyone here going to go into physio or anything like that down the track? I mean, I'm obviously a biomedical scientist, but I do like sport, and I've always been interested in regards to how the body works. So medicine says maybe. So this is the sort of stuff that they'll work on for corrective to diagnose where problems are with joints and stuff like that as well. They'll look at the connections and they'll look at the muscles that are actually, driving a lot of that actual power and things like that, and applying that force. It's a way that they can diagnose certain problems that people might have anatomically as well. So, okay, anatomically as well. So, okay, origins and insertions, right? Daniel says, if we focus on building strength in third class levels, is it more difficult? Oh, this could be good. This could be good. Is it more difficult since they maximize speed and distance? In terms of if you focus on building strength in third class levers, is it more difficult since they maximize speed and distance? Not really. In terms of building strength, not really. So strength comes mostly, and I'm getting off topic from the lecture here, but that's fine because this is awesome stuff. The reason why your guns grow, or any of your other muscles will grow, obviously, is you get your muscle tears and you get rebuilding. But the strength doesn't come from the mass. The strength comes from the recruitment of more motor neurons to that area. So then when you can increase size and you increase load, mostly, not so much increasing size, but when you increase load, you'll increase strength because your brain will actually say, we don't have enough innervation down here to be able to lift this load. Does that kind of answer your question there, Daniel? Or you can reword it if I haven't got it right. Nah, fantastic. Good stuff. Now, your origin and insertion, right? Always remember that the fixed point of the attachment of the muscle to the bone is the origin. The thing that it's moving is the insertion. People get confused on this all the time because there's a tendon here and there's a tendon there, right? So they're connecting, aren't they? But what you do need to remember is it's the one that actually does the work compared to the one that's getting pulled. The one that's actually getting moved by the other one is the insertion. The origin is the one that's initiating that work, right? That's what it says here. Origin is usually proximal to insertion. All right. So you do need just to remember the definitions of these in regards to muscles: agonists, antagonists, synergists, and fixators. Agonist does stuff, antagonist prevents people from doing it. Being antagonistic is stopping people from being annoying. Synergists and fixators are a little bit different though, and that's where people get a little bit stuck. So a synergist is the small muscle that's going to assist the agonist. It's kind of like, Robin to Batman, right? The fixator is the synergist. It's a synergist that assists the agonist by preventing the movement of another joint. So that's kind of a little bit different as well. Okay, that's pretty much roughly it in regards to, there are really cool names. There's a cool table for naming. That's table 11.1 in Martini. Again, just know the basics of this. I'm not going to ask big questions in the exam in regards to naming muscles and muscle nomenclature. Okay. Again, understand how these things all link in together as well. The other systems that it's going to be supported by. Obviously, your cardiovascular system needs to deliver the oxygen, remove carbon dioxide. That's linked to your respiratory system. That's going to fluctuate in regards to the demand of your muscles. Your skin is basically going to allow you to cool down when you're in the GIME in between reps. And your nervous and endocrine systems are going to basically be always working in the background to direct the responses of all these systems, right? So it's a complete package. Your muscular system, meaning your skeletal muscles, impact a lot of other things that are going on in your body as well. So people are leaving before they need to, which is always a sign that they've just had too much pump almost. You know, they've just got too excited. They're overwhelmed. They can't handle anymore, right? It's almost like being at an all-you-can-eat buffet where it's all really expensive tofu, and you're like, I can't even eat because I never thought this moment would happen. And then you just that's it. You're speechless. Nothing else happens. Is it kind of like that? Kind of. All right. Are there any questions? Are there any questions? Because we have hit the end, and we've got about 7 minutes left. I like to finish up and give myself 5 minutes to grab a copy. So when do we get the results of the quizzes? Yeah, Caitlin. First of all, Ranjit, the exam you'll find out when I find out. They don't release the exam timetable until a couple of weeks, so you'll find out then. Caitlin, you'll get the results for the quizzes. I released them. We've just had a few people who have got special consideration. So once they've actually got them, once they've completed them, then I'll release the marks of the quizzes. But yeah, unfortunately, otherwise it promotes collusion. But it won't be too long though, Caitlin. Yeah. Any rope tips? Are you scared? Oh no. Unfortunately, Amelia, there's nothing pays more like persistence, right? Just a little bit every day, a little bit every day on, and just getting that memory going as well. It gets easier and easier. And the thing is a lot of this stuff as a scientist in health science and what as well, you kind of want to remember all this stuff anyway. So it's not like you just need to get it through now and then move on. Can you repeat about the exam? So what I said about the exam, Sevia, is that I don't know when the exam is because they haven't released the exam timetable yet. I find out like about 2 days before you guys find out. So I'll put an announcement up on Canvas when I actually find out. Yeah. All right. Well, if there's no further questions, then I might go off and just, I don't know, I might try and just, throw some cold water on my face, get myself pumped up for the next one. You're very welcome, Harlan. Thanks for coming along. Um, you have your first anatomy class tomorrow, and they say you have to submit tomorrow. No, Ranjit, it's already on the announcements as well. Everyone that you've got that's due. Look at the due date on the actual Dropbox. Okay. Thank you, Daniel. Enjoy yours too. So, yeah. All right. It's a busy group. Fantastic. All right, everyone. Have a great day. I'll stop the recording now and I'll see you at the next one. Thanks a lot, everyone. I really appreciate the kind words. It's great to have all of you here. Thanks again.
aspetti te, senti. Cosa devo... Eh, cosa ha cambiato? All'inglese cosa ha cambiato?
Non notate che l'asciugamani là?
Lavati!
Che l'asciugamani?
Yeah!
Che là sono, sono per pulire i locali,
E ora te ne lavati con questi qua, tutti insieme. Non si merita che si asciugano i cani, è puliti, no? se lavora così. Le radici vanno